I have studied the rise and fall of great powers for decades, and I can tell you that we are living through one of history's most significant transitions. The unipolar world order that emerged after the Cold War is collapsing, and what is replacing it will be fundamentally different from anything the current generation has experienced. This is not a temporary disruption or a policy problem that can be managed. This is a structural shift in how global power is distributed, and these transitions are always turbulent, unpredictable, and dangerous. The unipolar moment began in 1991 when the Soviet Union dissolved and the United States emerged as the sole superpower. For 3 decades, American preferences shaped global institutions, trade rules, security arrangements, and even cultural norms. The dollar was unchallenged as the reserve currency. NATO expanded without meaningful opposition. International disputes were resolved through frameworks dominated by Western powers. This was not eternal order. It was a temporary condition created by specific historical circumstances that are now reversing. Understanding why this order is ending requires understanding how power actually works. Power is not absolute, it is relative. The United States remains the single most powerful nation by most metrics, but power is about the ability to shape outcomes, and that ability is declining rapidly. When you cannot prevent attacks in your own hemisphere, when rivals operate openly in regions you once controlled, when allies hedge their commitments, and when your economic leverage produces diminishing returns, you are no longer in the position you once occupied. The multipolar world that is emerging will not be a return to Cold War bipolarity. It will be more complex, with multiple regional power centers that operate semi-independently while competing and occasionally cooperating on global issues. I see at least 5 distinct poles forming, each with different strengths, different vulnerabilities, and different strategic objectives. The United States will remain the dominant power in the Western Hemisphere and maintain the world's strongest military and deepest capital markets. But its influence will be increasingly contested, its resources stretched across too many commitments, and its domestic political dysfunction will limit its ability to act decisively. America will still matter enormously, but it will no longer be able to dictate outcomes the way it did from 1991 to 2008. China has emerged as the primary challenger, not through military confrontation, but through economic integration, technological advancement, and patient strategic positioning. China's economy rivals America's in purchasing power terms. Its manufacturing capacity exceeds the United States, Europe, and Japan combined. Its Belt and Road Initiative has created dependencies across Asia, Africa, and Latin America that did not exist 20 years ago. China's model offers an alternative to Western liberal democracy, proving that authoritarian capitalism can deliver growth and stability, at least for extended periods. Europe represents a third pole, though its future is uncertain. The European Union has the world's largest single market and significant technological and industrial capacity, but it lacks political unity, energy independence, and military power. Europe's aging demographics and regulatory complexity limit its dynamism. Brexit weakened its cohesion. Energy dependence on Russia proved to be a strategic vulnerability. Europe matters because of its economic weight, but it is not positioned to compete independently with the United States or China in shaping global order. Russia operates as a disruptive power rather than a constructive pole. It lacks the economic strength to compete globally, but retains significant military capability, nuclear weapons, vast natural resources, and a willingness to use force that Western powers have largely abandoned. Russia's strategy is to undermine the existing order, create chaos that weakens adversaries, and position itself as a necessary partner in any new arrangement. It partners with China when convenient, but maintains independent interests. India represents the fifth pole, though it is still developing the capacity to project power beyond its region. India has the world's largest population, a growing economy, and increasing technological capability. It faces China as a regional competitor and seeks to balance Chinese influence without fully aligning with the United States. India's strategic autonomy makes it unpredictable, but also positions it to benefit from great power competition by extracting concessions from multiple sides. These five poles do not operate in isolation. They interact through overlapping spheres of influence, competing trade blocs, rival security arrangements, and parallel financial systems. This creates complexity that did not exist in the bipolar Cold War or the unipolar post-Cold War era. In a bipolar world, you were either with the United States or the Soviet Union. In a unipolar world, you operated within American-led institutions or remained marginalized. In a multipolar world, countries can play powers against each other, join multiple competing frameworks simultaneously, and hedge their commitments based on changing circumstances. History provides templates for these transitions. After Rome fell in the 5th century, Europe fragmented for centuries. Multiple kingdoms competed, trade collapsed, security deteriorated. Stability only returned when new organizing principles emerged through the Catholic Church and later the nation-state system. The transition was violent and reduced living standards. The Cold War's end in 1991 offers a recent example. The Soviet collapse created the unipolar moment, but the transition was not peaceful. Yugoslavia disintegrated through ethnic cleansing. Russia experienced economic collapse. Regional conflicts erupted as power vacuums appeared. The transition took a decade, and millions died before stability emerged. We are now entering a similar transition period as the unipolar order breaks down. The difference is that this time the stakes are higher because the system is global and deeply integrated. During the Roman collapse, most regions operated independently. Today, supply chains span continents, financial systems are interconnected, and weapons can strike anywhere on Earth. When this system fractures, the disruption will be felt everywhere simultaneously. The mechanism is straightforward. The United States overextended during its unipolar moment. Expensive wars in Afghanistan and Iraq drained resources without achieving objectives. Security commitments expanded without capacity to defend them. Persistent trade deficits transferred manufacturing to competitors. Accumulated debt now constrains policy. Meanwhile, competitors studied American weaknesses and built alternatives. China focused on economic integration, making itself indispensable while building military capability. Russia used energy leverage, cyber operations, and limited force to achieve regional objectives. Smaller powers learned to play great powers against each other, hedging all possible futures. The practical implications of this transition are profound. In a unipolar world, global rules are relatively stable because one power enforces them. In a multipolar world, rules become contested and variable depending on region and issue. This creates uncertainty that makes long-term planning difficult and increases the risk of miscalculation that leads to conflict. Trade will fragment into competing blocs. The idea of a single global market governed by universal rules is ending. Instead, we will see overlapping regional arrangements with different standards, currencies, and dispute resolution mechanisms. Companies will need to navigate multiple regulatory frameworks, and supply chains will be duplicated at higher cost to reduce dependence on potentially hostile powers. Currency systems are already fracturing. The dollar remains dominant, but faces challenges it did not face during the unipolar era. China is building payment systems that bypass SWIFT. BRICS nations are exploring alternatives to dollar-denominated trade. Central banks are diversifying reserves. This does not mean the dollar will collapse, but it means the extraordinary privilege the United States enjoyed from universal dollar dominance is eroding. Security arrangements will become more complex and less reliable. NATO remains the most powerful military alliance, but its members disagree on priorities and burden sharing. Asian security depends on American commitments that are increasingly questioned domestically. Middle Eastern countries that once relied entirely on American protection now court relationships with China and Russia as hedges. This creates ambiguity about who will defend whom under what circumstances, which increases the likelihood of aggressive probing by revisionist powers. Technology competition will intensify as each pole seeks to control critical capabilities. The semiconductor supply chain has become a strategic choke point. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnology are seen as foundational to future power. Countries that fall behind technologically will become dependent on those that lead, which creates incentives for massive investment in protectionist policies that reduce global efficiency. The most dangerous aspect of multipolar transitions is the increased risk of war. When power is clearly distributed and rules are well established, countries understand the costs of aggression and wars are rare. When power is shifting and rules are contested, miscalculation becomes common. A rising power may overestimate its strength. A declining power may overreact to challenges. Allies may fail to support each other. Adversaries may probe for weakness. All of these dynamics increase the probability of conflict. History shows that major power transitions often involve war. The rise of Germany led to World War I. The rise of Japan led to conflict in the Pacific. The Soviet-American competition stayed cold, largely because nuclear weapons made direct conflict suicidal. Today, nuclear weapons still provide some stability, but they do not prevent proxy conflicts, economic warfare, or limited military confrontations that could escalate unintentionally. The period from 2026 through 2040 will be particularly dangerous because this is when the transition accelerates but has not yet stabilized into a new equilibrium. The old rules no longer constrain behavior, but new rules have not been established. The declining power still has significant capability and may use it to prevent further erosion. The rising powers are emboldened but inexperienced in managing global responsibilities. This combination creates maximum uncertainty and maximum risk. For individuals and investors, understanding this transition is essential because it will affect everything from asset allocation to career planning to geographic location. In a unipolar world, betting on American dominance and dollar assets was rational because that dominance seemed permanent. In a multipolar world, concentration in any single system creates risk. Diversification takes on new meaning. It is not just about different asset classes, but about different jurisdictions, different currencies, and different political systems. Holding wealth entirely within one system exposes you to that system's specific risks, as power fragments having exposure across multiple poles provides hedging that was less necessary during the unipolar era. Geographic considerations become more important. Where you live and work matters more when regions may develop very differently. A thriving region in one pole may offer opportunities not available in declining regions of another pole. Mobility, both physical and financial, becomes more valuable as conditions change unpredictably. Skills and education also require rethinking. In a stable unipolar world, specialization was optimal because you could assume the system would remain consistent. In a fragmenting multipolar world, adaptability and broad capabilities become more valuable because the rules keep changing, and what works today may not work tomorrow. The transition to a multipolar order is not something that can be stopped through policy or leadership changes. It is driven by fundamental shifts in economic productive capacity, technological capability, demographic trends, and resource distribution. These forces operate over decades and are not easily reversed. The United States cannot restore its unipolar position through better strategy, and challengers cannot be contained indefinitely through pressure. What can be influenced is how smoothly or violently the transition occurs. Leaders who recognize the inevitability of multipolarity can work to establish new rules, manage competitions, and reduce the risk of catastrophic conflict. Leaders who deny the transition and try to preserve a dying order through force will accelerate instability and increase suffering. For most people, this transition will feel disorienting because the assumptions that govern their entire adult lives are breaking down. The idea that globalization is inevitable, that liberal democracy will spread universally, that economic interdependence prevents conflict. All of these beliefs are being challenged by events. The world is not becoming more integrated and peaceful. It is fragmenting and becoming more contested. This does not mean regression to primitive conditions. Technology will continue advancing. Living standards in many regions will continue improving, but progress will be uneven and the path forward will be turbulent. Some regions will thrive under new arrangements while others stagnate. Some countries will adapt successfully while others collapse into dysfunction. The key insight is that the next 2 decades will not be a continuation of the past 3. The unipolar moment was historically abnormal, a brief period when one power dominated completely. That period is ending, and we are returning to the historical norm where multiple great powers compete for influence, form shifting alliances, and occasionally fight when vital interests collide. Those who understand this reality and position accordingly will navigate the transition successfully. Those who cling to assumptions based on the unipolar era will be repeatedly surprised by events that seem inexplicable through that outdated framework. The multipolar world is not coming. It is already here. The only question is whether you recognize it in time to adapt your strategies, your investments, and your expectations to the reality that is unfolding around us.